Madeline's return begins with a single email. Her estranged grandfather has died, leaving her the struggling vineyard she once loved, and a choice that could change everything. But when past regrets meet unexpected sparks, will she walk away? Or come home for good? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Madeline Carrington stared at the email on her phone for the 5th time that morning. Her grandfather was dead. The news shouldn't have hit her so hard, they hadn't spoken in years. But there it was, an emptiness spreading through her chest as she stood in her sleek Manhattan apartment. "Ms. Carrington?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock wine tasting is here. The representatives from Le Chateau are waiting in the conference room. Tell them I'll be right there," Maddie replied, straightening her designer suit and tucking her phone away. At 39, Maddie had built the perfect life. She was the most sought-after wine consultant in New York, with a client list that read like a who's who of fine dining. She could identify the region, year, and often the exact vineyard of a wine with just one sip. But right now, all she could taste was regret. The tasting went smoothly, as they always did. Maddie was professional, charming, and completely focused, at least on the outside. Inside, her mind kept drifting to memories of a vineyard in Northern California, to summers spent running between rows of grapevines, and to her grandfather's weathered hands showing her how to check if the grapes were ready. Back in her office, she called the lawyer handling her grandfather's estate. "Ms. Carrington, I was about to call you," the lawyer said. "As the sole heir, you've inherited Carrington Vines. Your grandfather was quite clear about that in his will." "Sell it," Maddie said immediately. "Find a good realtor and—" "I'm afraid it's not that simple," the lawyer interrupted. "There are some conditions attached to the inheritance. You need to come to California to sign the paperwork in person." 3 days later, Maddie stepped out of her rental car onto the dusty driveway of Carrington Vines. The afternoon sun beat down on the rolling hills, covered with neat rows of grapevines. The old Victorian farmhouse stood just as she remembered. See it? Its white paint peeling slightly at the edges. She'd dressed for a quick in-and-out trip, sign papers, meet with realtors, then back to New York by the weekend. But something about seeing the vineyard again made her pause. It was smaller than she remembered and clearly struggling. Several sections of vines looked neglected, and the equipment barn's roof was in desperate need of repair. As she approached the house, a tall figure emerged from between the rows of vines. The man was suntanned, with dark hair streaked with hints of grey at the temples. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, both showing signs of a day's hard work. "Madeline Carrington," he said, his voice low and familiar. "Never thought I'd see you back here." Maddie squinted against the sun, trying to place him. Then it hit her. Luke Moretti," he nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth before extending one to her. "Been a long time." When their hands touched, Maddie felt an unexpected jolt. This wasn't the gangly vineyard hand she vaguely remembered from her teenage summers. This was a man solid and sure, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at both laughter and hardship. "I didn't know you still worked here," she said, pulling her hand away a bit too quickly. 15 years now. Your grandfather made me vineyard manager after I got my degree in viticulture." His eyes assessed her city clothes and high heels. "I'm guessing you're not here for a happy reunion with the family land." Before she could answer, an older woman came bustling out of the house. "Maddie! Oh, look at you!" "Rosa." Maddie's face broke into the first genuine smile since she'd arrived. Rosa Martinez had been the housekeeper at Carrington Vines for as long as Maddie could remember. The woman enveloped her in a warm hug that smelled of fresh bread and comfort. Come inside," Rosa urged. "You must be tired from your journey. I've made up your old room." "Oh, I'm not staying," Maddie said quickly. "I have a hotel reservation in town. I'm just here to handle the estate matters." Rosa's face fell, but she nodded. "Of course. At least come in for some iced tea before you go." Inside, the farmhouse was exactly as Maddie remembered, worn but welcoming, with old family photos lining the walls. She paused at one that showed her as a teenager, laughing next to her grandfather as they held up a prize ribbon from a local wine competition. Luke followed her gaze. "That was the year your Merlot blend won at the county fair. Your grandfather was so proud he talked about it for months. He kept this up all these years, Maddie asked, surprised. He kept everything of yours, Rosa said softly, handing Maddie a glass of iced tea, even after you stopped coming back. Maddie felt a stab of guilt. She'd left for college and then thrown herself into building her career, making excuses year after year for why she couldn't visit. Phone calls became shorter, then less frequent, until they'd stopped altogether. I had my reasons, she said stiffly. We all do, Luke replied, his tone neutral but his eyes knowing. The awkward moment was broken by the arrival of the lawyer, a balding man carrying a briefcase who introduced himself as Mr. Peterson. Shall we get down to business? He suggested, setting up his paperwork on the kitchen table. Yes, please, Maddie said, grateful for the distraction. I don't have much time. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. As I mentioned, your inheritance comes with conditions. Your grandfather's will states that you must take personal responsibility for Carrington Vines for a minimum of 3 months before making any decisions about its future. 3 months, Maddie exclaimed. That's impossible. I have clients, commitments. If you refuse, the property goes to a wine conglomerate that's been trying to buy it for years, the lawyer continued. Your grandfather was very specific. He wanted you to understand what you'd be selling before you made that choice. Maddie glanced at Luke, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. Did you know about this? I did, he admitted. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was stubborn. Just like someone else I know. This is ridiculous, Maddie muttered. I can't just put my life on hold for 3 months. Actually, Luke said, I think it makes perfect sense. You're selling off generations of Carrington history. You should at least understand what you're giving away. I understand exactly what I'm giving away, Maddie snapped. A failing business that's more trouble than it's worth. Luke's jaw tightened. Your grandfather poured his heart and soul into this place. He held on through drought years, market crashes, and personal tragedy, and he did it all hoping that someday you'd come back and see its value. Well, I'm here now, Maddie said, but only because I had no choice. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rosa quietly excused herself, while Mr. Peterson awkwardly shuffled his papers. Look, Luke finally said, his voice softer. I made a promise to your grandfather before he died. I promised I'd keep this place going, no matter what. I'm not asking you to fall in love with it. Just give it the 3 months, learn about it. Then if you still want to sell, I won't stand in your way. Something in his earnest expression made Maddie pause. She thought about her empty agenda for the next few months, the tasting events and consultations she could reschedule, the clients who could wait. And deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe she owed this to her grandfather. To the little girl who had once loved running through these vines. Fine, she said at last. 3 months, but not a day more. Mr. Peterson smiled, relieved. Excellent. I'll have the temporary management papers drawn up. In the meantime, Luke will bring you up to speed on the Vineyard operations. That night, after checking into her hotel in town, Maddie sat on the edge of the bed and called her assistant in New York. Cancel everything for the next 3 months, she instructed. Family emergency. I'll need to stay in California. After hanging up, she walked to the window and looked out at the distant hills, where Carrington Vines lay. The setting sun cast the vineyards in a golden light that stirred something deep in her memory. Summer evenings helping with the harvest, the sweet smell of ripe grapes, her grandfather's rare smile when she'd done something right. For a moment, she almost felt a twinge of, was it anticipation? But she quickly pushed it aside. This was just business. 3 months, then back to her real life. What Maddie didn't know was that Luke Moretti was sitting on the porch of the farmhouse at that very moment, looking at an old photograph of a younger Maddie laughing among the vines. Beside him was a worn journal, her grandfather's, open to a page with a single line underlined, "Someday she'll come home, and the vines will call her to stay." Luke closed the journal with a sigh. 3 months wasn't much time to heal the rift between Maddie and her heritage, but he had made a promise, and Luke Moretti never broke his promises. The next morning would bring the first day of Maddie's reluctant homecoming and the beginning of a journey neither she nor Luke could have predicted. Maddie woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. She fumbled for it in the unfamiliar hotel room, squinting at the morning light streaming through the curtains. "Hello?" she mumbled. "Rise and shine, city girl." Luke's voice was far too cheerful for this hour. "If you're going to learn about running a vineyard, you'd better start early. I'll be at the hotel in 20 minutes. Before she could protest, he hung up. Maddie groaned and dragged herself out of bed. This was definitely not part of her normal routine. In New York, she rarely started her day before 9, and it always began with a perfectly brewed espresso, not a rude awakening from a pushy vineyard manager. When Luke pulled up in a dusty pickup truck, Maddie was waiting outside in what she thought was appropriate attire, designer jeans and a silk blouse. One look at her shoes and Luke shook his head. "Those won't last an hour in the vineyard," he said, nodding toward her leather flats. "We'll need to stop by the general store." An hour later, dressed in rubber boots and a cotton work shirt that felt strange against her skin, Maddie stood in the middle of a row of grapevines as Luke explained the basics. "These are Cabernet Sauvignon grapes," he said, gently handling the clusters. "Your grandfather specialized in Bordeaux varieties. This section here was the first he ever planted over 40 years ago." Despite herself, Maddie was impressed by the neat rows extending over the hillside. "They look healthy, I guess?" Luke's laugh was warm and genuine. "You really don't know anything about growing grapes, do you? And yet you can tell everyone. In New York, which wines to drink?" "Knowing wine and growing grapes are different skills," Maddie said defensively. "I didn't need to get my hands dirty to train my palate." "Fair enough," Luke conceded. "But there's something special about understanding the whole process from soil to bottle." He handed her a pair of pruning shears. "Here, I'll show you." For the next few hours, Maddie followed Luke through the vineyard, learning more than she ever wanted to know about soil pH, irrigation systems, and pest management. Her back ached, her hands were getting calluses, and the sun was hotter than she remembered from her childhood summers. "We're facing some serious challenges," Luke explained as they walked back to the truck for water. 3 years of drought have stressed the vines. Last season's yield was down nearly 30%. "No wonder the place is struggling," Maddie muttered. "It's not just the drought," Luke said. "Your grandfather refused to sell to Westland Wine Group, and they've been trying to force him out ever since. They bought the neighboring property and diverted the creek that used to provide natural irrigation." "Westland?" Maddie perked up. "They're one of the biggest distributors in the country. And they want to turn Carrington Vines into a mass production operation," Luke said, his voice hardening. "No more small batches, no more special care, just maximum yield and profit." "That's business," Maddie shrugged. "Sometimes the little guys can't compete." Luke stopped walking and turned to face her. "Is that really how you see it? This isn't just business. This is your family's legacy. Your grandfather built this place with his own hands after your grandmother died. Every vine, every bottle was his way of keeping her memory alive." Maddie flinched at the intensity in his eyes. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know," Luke said quietly. "But you could, if you'd give this place a chance." Back at the farmhouse, Rosa had prepared lunch. Fresh bread, local cheese, and tomatoes from the garden. As they ate on the porch, Maddie found herself watching Luke. There was something about the way he moved, the certainty in his hands, that was unexpectedly compelling. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "how did you end up here?" 15 years is a long time to work at one vineyard. Luke took a sip of water before answering. "I grew up nearby. My father was a farmhand who dreamed of having his own land someday, but he never got the chance. After college, I had job offers from bigger vineyards, but your grandfather gave me something more valuable, a chance to help build something meaningful, to have a say in how things were done." "And that was enough for you?" Maddie asked, genuinely. "Curious, not always," Luke admitted. "I got married young, had a son. My wife wanted a different life, city lights, more money. When she left, she took Tommy with her. They're in Seattle now." "I'm sorry," Maddie said, surprised by the pang of sympathy she felt. Luke shrugged. "Tommy visits during summers. He's 13 now, getting too cool for the vineyard, but I think he secretly still likes it here." He glanced at her. "What about you? No husband, kids?" "No time," Maddie said simply. "My career keeps me busy. Too busy to have a life." The question wasn't judgmental, just curious. Before Maddie could answer, a sleek black car pulled up the driveway, raising dust clouds. As it came to a stop, a tall man in an expensive suit emerged, his smile practiced and polished. "Miss Carrington, Daniel Westland." He extended his hand. "I heard you were in town and thought I'd introduce myself. My company has had a standing offer on this property. For years." Luke stood up, his posture tense. "This is private property, Westland." Daniel's smile didn't falter. "I'm simply paying a courtesy call to the new owner." He turned back to Maddie. "I understand you're in the wine business yourself. We should talk. My offer would solve all your inheritance problems." He gestured vaguely at the weathered buildings and equipment. Despite her initial plan to sell, something about Westland's smug confidence irritated Maddie. "Thank you for coming all this way, Mr. Westland, but I'm not making any decisions for at least 3 months." Daniel's smile tightened. "Of course, take your time. But remember, properties like this require significant investment to remain viable. My offer won't stay open indefinitely." He handed her a business card. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." After he drove away, Luke looked at Maddie with newfound respect. "I thought you'd jump at his offer." "I might still," she warned. "But I don't like being pressured, and there was something off about him." That evening, after Luke dropped her back at the hotel, Maddie decided to explore the small town of Oak Ridge. It had changed since her last visit. More tourist shops and tasting rooms, fewer of the local businesses she remembered. At a small wine bar, she ordered a glass of local red and was surprised to see Carrington Vines Reserve Cabernet 2019 on the menu. "That's a special one," the bartender said, noticing her interest. "Limited production, but worth every penny. Old Mr. Carrington was one of the good ones, made wine like they used to, with heart." Maddie sipped the wine thoughtfully. It was excellent, complex, and balanced, with notes of blackberry and cedar, and a lingering finish that spoke of careful aging. This wasn't mass-produced wine. This was craftsmanship. "Did you know him?" she asked the bartender. "Everyone knew Frank Carrington," the man replied. "Stubborn as they come, but fair. Always had time to talk grapes with anyone who was interested. Word is his granddaughter inherited the place, some big-shot wine expert from New York who'll probably sell it to Westland." Maddie winced but said nothing. Was that really how people saw her? Back in her hotel room, unable to sleep, Maddie searched online for information about Carrington Vines. There wasn't much, a simple website that looked like it hadn't been updated in years, a few positive mentions in wine blogs, and a recent local news article about her grandfather's passing that described him as one of the last independent vintners in a region increasingly dominated by corporate interests. On impulse, she searched for Luke Moretti and found a few mentions in vineyard management journals and a photo of him accepting a sustainability award on behalf of Carrington Vines 3 years earlier. The next morning, Maddie arrived at the Vineyard before Luke could pick her up. She found him in the cellar checking oak barrels. "You're early," he said, surprised. "And you brought coffee." "Peace offering," she explained, handing him a cup. "Show me what happens after the grapes are harvested." For the next week, Maddie immersed herself in learning about the vineyard operations. She reviewed the financial records, inspected equipment, and even helped with basic tasks in the fields. The more she learned, the more she understood why her grandfather had been unwilling to sell. One evening, as they were finishing a long day of work, Luke took her to a small hill overlooking the entire property. The sunset painted the vineyard in shades of gold and amber, the rows of vines creating patterns across the landscape. "Your grandfather used to bring me up here when I first started working for him," Luke said. "He'd say, 'Remember this view, Luke. This is what we're fighting for.'" "It is beautiful," Maddie admitted. "He used to bring you here too," Luke said quietly. "Don't you remember? You were about 16, I think. He was teaching you about terroir, how the slope of the land, the soil, the sun exposure all affect the grapes." Maddie closed her eyes, the memory washing over her. "I remember. He said, 'Wine isn't just made in the cellar, Maddie girl. It's born in the land.' You loved it here once," Luke said, his voice gentle. "What happened?" Maddie was quiet for a long moment. "The summer I turned 18, I had to make a choice. Stay here, go to UC Davis to study viticulture like Grandpa, wanted, or go east for business school. We had a huge fight. He said if I left, I shouldn't bother coming back until I was ready to commit to Carrington Vines. And you never did, Luke finished. I called a few times, Maddie said defensively, but he was so cold, so disappointed. Eventually, it was easier just to build my own life. He regretted that fight, Luke told her, especially in his last years. He kept your room exactly as you left it. Maddie blinked back unexpected tears. I didn't know. As they stood there, watching the last light fade from the sky, Luke's hand found hers. The touch was tentative, a question rather than a demand. After a moment of hesitation, Maddie interlaced her fingers with his, surprised by how right it felt. Rosa was waiting for them at the farmhouse with dinner. As they ate, she regaled Maddie with stories about her grandfather that made her laugh and cry at the same time. He wasn't perfect, Rosa said, but he loved this place and he loved you. Even when he was angriest, your picture was still on his nightstand. That night, Maddie decided to stay at the farmhouse instead of returning to the hotel. As she settled into her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the books and trinkets of her youth, she felt something shift inside her, a door opening to possibilities she'd never considered. Outside her window, the vineyard stretched into the darkness, the vines standing like sentinels under the moonlight. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Maddie began to wonder if coming home might mean more than just fulfilling an obligation. What she didn't know was that Daniel Westland was already setting plans in motion that would soon force her to decide where her true loyalties lay, with the world she'd built for herself, or with the land and the man she was unexpectedly beginning to care for. The next morning, Maddie woke to the sound of rain pattering against her childhood bedroom window. For a moment, she felt disoriented. This wasn't her sleek Manhattan apartment with its city views and traffic sounds. Then she remembered where she was and why. She found Luke in the kitchen, studying weather reports on his laptop while drinking coffee. He looked up when she entered, his smile warming his eyes. "Morning, sleepyhead. I was beginning to think you'd never get up." Maddie glanced at the clock. 6:30 a.m. In New York, she'd still be in bed for another hour at least. "Very funny. Is that coffee I smell?" Rosa bustled in with a fresh pot. Sit. I'll make you breakfast." "The rain is good for the vines," Luke explained as Maddie joined him at the table. "But we've got a problem. The irrigation pump for the east section broke down yesterday. With the forecast calling for dry weather next week, we need to fix it fast." "How much will that cost?" Maddie asked, slipping automatically into business mode. Luke grimaced. "More than we have in the operating account. Your grandfather was... well, cash flow wasn't his strong suit." Maddie sighed. "Show me the books after breakfast. I need to understand exactly where we stand." The vineyard's financial situation was worse than she'd expected. Bills from suppliers were piled up. Equipment needed repairs, and the next harvest was still months away. No wonder her grandfather had considered Westland's offer. "We've been getting by on the reputation of our reserve wines," Luke explained. "They sell out every year, but there's just not enough volume to keep the whole operation afloat." "What about a bank loan?" Maddie suggested. Luke shook his head. "Already tried. 3 banks turned us down because of the back taxes your grandfather owed. We've been paying those off slowly, but it's not enough to restore our credit." Maddie stared out the window at the rain-soaked vineyard. In New York, she would have known exactly what to do: cut losses, find investors, or sell to the highest bidder. But here, looking at the land her family had tended for generations, those cold business solutions felt wrong. "I might have an idea," she said slowly. "Let me make some calls." Back in her room, Maddie reached out to several of her high-end restaurant clients in San Francisco and Los Angeles. By lunchtime, she had 3 tentative commitments for exclusive purchasing agreements, if the wine met their standards. "They'll need samples," she told Luke, "and we'll need to bottle a new batch soon to show them what we can do." Luke's face lit up. "I've been working on something your grandfather and I started before he got sick. A special blend using the oldest vines. On the property, it's almost ready." That afternoon, they went to the cellar to taste it. The stone walls kept the room cool as Luke carefully drew samples from 3 different barrels. "This is still young," he cautioned, "but I think it has potential." Maddie swirled the deep ruby liquid in her glass. inhaling its complex aroma before taking a sip. The wine was extraordinary, rich and balanced with layers of flavor that unfolded slowly. It reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with wine in the first place. "Luke, this is incredible," she said honestly. "What did you call it?" "Your grandfather wanted to call it Eleanor's Reserve, and after your grandmother." Luke's eyes met hers over the rim of his glass. "But I've been thinking, maybe it should be Madeline's Return instead." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Maddie felt a flush that had nothing to do with the wine. Before she could respond, her phone rang, her assistant in New York. "Maddie? Thank goodness I reached you. Bordeaux Imports is hosting a major tasting event next month, and they specifically requested you as their consultant. It's a huge opportunity. They're looking to establish a permanent position for someone with your expertise." "In France?" Maddie asked, turning away from Luke's questioning gaze. "Yes, it's the job you've been working toward for years. They need an answer by the end of the month." After hanging up, Maddie stood silently, her thoughts in turmoil. A permanent position in France had been her dream since business school. But now, with her hands still warm from Luke's touch and the taste of his remarkable wine on her lips, that dream suddenly felt distant and hollow. "Good news?" Luke asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just work," Maddie said vaguely. "Nothing urgent." The lie sat uncomfortably between them for the rest of the day as they worked side by side, preparing wine samples for the potential restaurant clients. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, bringing with it violent winds that threatened the young spring growth on the vines. Luke organized an emergency team of workers to secure protective coverings over the most vulnerable sections. Despite Maddie's protests that she'd be in the way, Luke handed her a raincoat. "Every hand helps. Besides, you should see what we're up against." Drenched and mud-splattered, they worked until well after midnight. Maddie was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. There was something powerful about fighting alongside others to protect something valuable. As they trudged back to the farmhouse, Luke suddenly grabbed her arm. "Look," he said, pointing to the porch. A sleek car was parked in the driveway, and Daniel Westland stood under the shelter of the porch, looking impatient. "What's he doing here at this hour?" Maddie wondered aloud. "Nothing good," Luke muttered. Westland straightened when he saw them. "Ms. Carrington, Mr. Moretti, I apologize for the late visit, but I have information that couldn't wait." He glanced at their muddy appearance with thinly veiled distaste. "Perhaps we could speak inside." In the kitchen, Westland declined Rose's offer of coffee and got straight to business. "I've just come from a meeting with the County Water Board. It seems Carrington Vines has been drawing more than its allotted water share from the aquifer." "That's not possible," Luke protested. "We've been careful about our usage, especially with the drought." Westland's smile was cold. "Nevertheless, the board has issued a citation. The fines are substantial. Given your current financial situation, I thought you might want to reconsider my offer." He slid a document across the table. "I'm prepared to increase it by 15% and take care of all outstanding debts." Maddie looked at the figure and felt her breath catch. It was generous, more than generous. With that money, she could start her own consulting firm in France, never worry about finances again. "I'll need time to consider this," she said carefully. "Of course." Westland stood to leave. "But don't take too long. Water restrictions begin in 2 days. Without proper irrigation, this season's crop will fail. I'd hate to see your grandfather's legacy wither on the vine." After he left, Luke paced the kitchen angrily. "He's lying. We haven't exceeded our water allowance. He must have someone on the board in his pocket." "Can we fight this?" Maddie asked. "With what money? Legal battles take time we don't have." Luke's frustration was palpable. "This is how Westland operates. He finds your weakness and exploits it. Your grandfather fought him for years." Maddie felt a surge of anger. "Then we'll find another way. I'm not giving up that easily." The look Luke gave her was full of surprise and something else. Hope, perhaps. "You know, you sound just like him right now." "My grandfather," Luke nodded. "Stubborn as hell when someone tries to push him around. Despite the crisis, Maddie found herself smiling. "I'll take that as a compliment." The next day, Maddie dove into research, calling water conservation experts and checking the vineyard's usage records. Luke, meanwhile, gathered support from neighboring small vineyards who had also faced pressure from Westland. By evening, they had a plan. A water conservation expert would testify that Carrington Vine's irrigation system was one of the most efficient in the county, and Maddie had discovered that the water board chairman's wife worked for Westland's company. A clear conflict of interest. "We still need money for immediate expenses," Luke pointed out. "The irrigation pump won't fix itself." Maddie hesitated, then made a decision. "I have savings. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to keep us going until the restaurants make their decisions about our wine." "You'd invest your own money?" Luke asked, clearly stunned. "I thought you were planning to sell." "I'm reconsidering," Maddie admitted. "Besides, this is personal now. Westland tried to bully us. Nobody bullies a Carrington." The smile that spread across Luke's face made her heart skip. Before she could overthink it, Maddie leaned forward and kissed him. His surprise lasted only a second before he pulled her closer, his hands gentle but certain on her waist. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Luke tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been wanting to do that since you arrived," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" she asked. "I was afraid you'd run back to New York even faster," he said with a rueful smile. The moment was interrupted by Rosa calling them for dinner. Throughout the meal, their eyes kept meeting across the table, secret smiles passing between them like private messages. Later that night, unable to sleep, Maddie wandered out to the porch. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with stars, so many more than she could ever see in New York. She heard the screen door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Luke. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at the starlit vineyard. "Tell me about my grandfather's last days," Maddie said suddenly. "Was he in pain?" Luke's voice was gentle. "Not physically. The heart attack was quick. But he had regrets. He talked about you often." "What did he say?" Maddie asked, her throat tight. "That he was proud of what you'd accomplished, even if it wasn't the path he would have chosen for you. That he wished he'd been less stubborn, reached out more." Luke took her hand. "The night before he died, he made me promise two things: to keep the vineyard going and to make sure you knew how much he loved you, even when he was too proud to say it." Tears slid down Maddie's cheeks. Luke brushed them away with his thumb, then pulled her into his arms. In his embrace, surrounded by the night sounds of the vineyard, Maddie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The first restaurant client was coming to taste their wines, and the water board hearing was scheduled for the following day. Maddie spent hours preparing financial projections, while Luke worked with the vineyard crew to showcase their best products. The restaurant's sommelier, a former colleague of Maddie's, was impressed. "This is exceptional quality," she said after tasting the special blend. "We'd like to feature it as our premium house wine, with exclusive rights to the first 50 cases." As she was leaving, she pulled Maddie aside. "I heard about the job offer from Bordeaux Imports. Will you take it?" Maddie glanced toward Luke, who was answering questions from the sommelier's assistant. "I haven't decided yet. For what it's worth," her colleague said, following her gaze. "I've never seen you look at a French vineyard the way you look at this place." Or at him. That afternoon, as they were celebrating their first successful sale, Maddie received a call from her lawyer in New York. "Miss Carrington, I was reviewing your grandfather's will again and found something unusual. There's a codicil that wasn't in the original documents. It appears your grandfather added it just days before his death." "What does it say?" Maddie asked, a strange feeling of foreboding washing over her. "It's complicated. The vineyard isn't entirely yours. According to this, Luke Moretti holds a 49% ownership stake, granted in recognition of his years of service and dedication." Maddie nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible. Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" "The codicil was only to take effect after the 3-month evaluation period. Your grandfather was very specific about that." After hanging up, Maddie sat in stunned silence, Had her grandfather expected her to sell? Was this his way of ensuring Luke could stop her? Or had he hoped they would become partners, preserving Carrington Vines together? More importantly, why hadn't Luke told her? The answer came to her with sudden clarity. She rushed out to the vineyard where Luke was checking on the newly protected vines. "You knew," she said without preamble. "You knew my grandfather left you part of the vineyard." Luke straightened, his expression confirming her suspicion. "I was going to tell you after the 3 months. I didn't want it to influence your decision." "Why not?" she demanded. "It changes everything." "Does it?" Luke asked quietly. "Does it change how you feel about this place? About what we're building here?" He paused, his voice dropping. "About us." Maddie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, her phone rang again. It was Daniel Westland. "Ms. Carrington, I thought you should know the water board has moved up the hearing to tomorrow morning. And I've just increased my offer by another 10%. I suggest you consider it carefully. This is your last chance." As Maddie looked from the phone to Luke's concerned face, she realized she was standing at a crossroads. Ahead of her lay 2 dramatically different futures: the prestigious career in France she'd always thought she wanted, or a challenging new life rebuilding her family's legacy alongside a man who had already claimed a piece of her heart. The choice was hers, but time was running out. Maddie barely slept that night. She sat on the porch swing until dawn, wrestling with her feelings and the discovery of Luke's partial ownership. The vineyard looked peaceful in the early morning light, dew glistening on the vines. It was hard to believe that in a few hours, they'd be fighting for its survival. When Luke found her, she was still in yesterday's clothes, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You've been out here all night," he said, concern etched on his face as he handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "I had a lot to think about." Maddie took a sip, letting the warmth seep through her. "Why didn't you tell me about the ownership?" "Steak." Luke sat beside her on the swing. "I wanted you to make your decision based on how you felt about the vineyard, not because of some legal obligation. If you stayed, I wanted it to be because you wanted to, not because you had to." "That wasn't your choice to make," Maddie said, but there was no anger in her voice now, just fatigue. "We should be partners in this, making decisions together." "Does that mean you're considering staying?" Hope crept into Luke's voice. Before Maddie could answer, Rosa came hurrying out. "The lawyer is on the phone. The water board hearing has been moved up again. It starts in 1 hour. "Westland," Luke growled. "He's trying to catch us unprepared." They rushed to get ready. Maddie changed quickly into her most businesslike outfit, a sharp blazer and tailored pants that reminded her of boardroom battles in New York. This was familiar territory: high-pressure negotiations, strategic thinking, outmaneuvering opponents. For the first time since arriving, she felt truly confident. "Let me handle Westland," she told Luke as they drove to the county offices. "I've dealt with his type before." The hearing room was small and stuffy, already half filled with Westland's people when they arrived. Daniel Westland himself sat near the front, looking smugly confident. "Ms. Carrington," he greeted her with artificial warmth, "have you considered my offer? This proceeding could be quite unpleasant for you." "I've considered it," Maddie said coolly, "and I've decided that Carrington Vines isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Westland's smile hardened. "We'll see about that." The hearing began with the water board chairman, a balding man with nervous eyes, explaining the citation. According to their records, Carrington Vines had exceeded its water allocation by 30% over the past 3 months. When it was their turn to respond, Maddie approached the podium with a stack of documents. "Members of the board, these allegations are not only false but deliberately manufactured. I have here the complete water usage records for Carrington Vines, verified by an independent expert." She distributed copies to each board member. "As you can see, our usage has been consistently below our allocation." She then introduced their expert witness, Dr. Elaine Chen from the State Agricultural University, who confirmed that Carrington Vines' irrigation system was among the most efficient in the region. "Furthermore," Maddie continued, "I'd like to raise the issue of a serious conflict of interest." She produced employment records showing that the chairman's wife was a senior manager at one of Westland's subsidiary companies. "Mr. Chairman, you should have recused yourself from this matter entirely." Whispers rippled through the room. The chairman's face reddened as he shuffled his papers nervously. "This is outrageous," Westland interrupted, standing up. "These accusations are baseless and defamatory." "On the contrary," came a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Joe Martinez, Rosa's husband, standing in the doorway. "The county has been investigating reports of water diversion from several small vineyards in the area. Just this morning, we discovered unauthorized equipment on Westland property that was altering water meter readings for neighboring land, including Carrington Vines." The meeting erupted into chaos. Amidst the uproar, Maddie caught Luke's eye across the room. His face was lit with admiration and something deeper, something that made her heart race. The hearing was adjourned pending a full investigation. As people filed out, Westland confronted Maddie and Luke in the hallway. "This isn't over," he warned, his composure cracking. "One way or another, I'll get that land." "No, you won't," Maddie said firmly. "You underestimated how much I care about my family's legacy. That was your mistake." Back at the vineyard, the news traveled fast. By afternoon, neighbors were stopping by to congratulate them and offer help with the upcoming harvest. The sense of community was something Maddie had forgotten existed, something her isolated life in New York had never provided. As the sun began to set, she found herself drawn to her grandmother's rose garden behind the house. It had fallen into neglect over the years, but a few stubborn blooms still pushed through the weeds. Kneeling in the soil, Maddie began clearing away the overgrowth, uncovering the garden's original shape. Luke found her there an hour later, her hands dirty, her face flushed with exertion. "Rosa sent me to call you for dinner," he explained, watching her work with curiosity. "What are you doing?" "Remembering," Maddie said simply. "My grandmother taught me about these roses when I was little. Each variety has a story." She touched a pale pink bloom gently. "This one is called Eleanor's Joy. My grandfather planted it the year they were married." Luke knelt beside her. "He added a new rose every year on their anniversary, even after she died. The last one is over there." He pointed to a vibrant red rose near the fence. "He called it Madeline's Promise." Tears sprang to Maddie's eyes. "He named a rose after me?" "He planted it the year you left," Luke explained. "He said it was to remind him that someday you'd come back and see how beautiful it had grown." Maddie sat back on her heels, overwhelmed by the realization of how much love had surrounded her all these years, even when she'd been too blind to see it. "The job in France," she said suddenly. "They called again today. They need my answer by tomorrow." Luke was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the roses rather than her face. "What are you going to tell them?" "I don't know," Maddie admitted. "A month ago, it would have been an automatic yes. Now," she gestured around them, "everything's changed." "Because of the vineyard?" Luke asked. "Because of everything. The vineyard, my grandfather's memory, the community here." She met his eyes directly. "Because of you." Luke reached for her hand, his thumb gently rubbing the dirt from her fingers. "I can't compete with France, Maddie. I wouldn't try to keep you from your dreams." "What if my dreams have changed?" she whispered. Before he could answer, Rosa called. From the porch, that dinner was getting cold. The moment broke, but something had shifted between them, a recognition of possibilities neither had dared voice before. That night, after dinner, Maddie excused herself early and went to her grandfather's study. She had avoided the room since arriving, but now she felt drawn to it. The space was just as she remembered. Bookshelves lined with viticulture texts, the worn leather chair behind the desk, family photos on every surface. In the bottom drawer of the desk, she found a leather-bound journal. Opening it, she recognized her grandfather's handwriting immediately. It was a record of the vineyard, not just facts and figures, but his thoughts, hopes, and observations over the years. As Maddie read, her grandfather's voice seemed to fill the room. His entries about her were especially poignant. Pride in her early interest in winemaking, worry when she left for college, regret over their final argument, and unwavering hope that someday she would return. The last entry was dated just days before his death. Signed the papers today, making Luke part owner. He's earned it with his dedication and his heart for this land. My hope is that when Maddie returns, and I believe she will, they'll find a way to work together. They're both stubborn as mules, but they share a passion for excellence that this place deserves. I won't be here to see it, but I know that together they could make Carrington Vines greater than I ever could alone. Maybe they'll even find in each other what Eleanor and I had, a love that grows deeper with each season, like the roots of our oldest vines. Tears flowed freely down Maddie's cheeks as she closed the journal. Her grandfather had seen what she was only now beginning to understand, that Luke wasn't an obstacle to her happiness, but potentially the key to it. The next morning, Maddie woke with absolute clarity about what she needed to do. She packed a small bag, left a note for Luke, and drove to San Francisco. She had meetings to attend and loose ends to tie up. 3 days later, as evening fell over Carrington Vines, Luke stood in the cellar, preparing bottles of their special blend for the new restaurant clients. The samples had been a huge success, with orders coming in faster than they could fill them. It should have been a moment of triumph, but all he felt was an empty ache. Maddie was gone. Her note had been brief, explaining that she needed time to think and make arrangements, but offering no hint of her final decision. The deadline for the France position had passed yesterday, and Luke had heard nothing. He tried to focus on the bottling, but his mind kept wandering to the last few weeks. Maddie's gradual transformation from reluctant heir to passionate defender of the vineyard. The softening in her eyes when she looked at him, the way she fit so perfectly in his arms. The sound of tires on gravel made him look up. Probably Rosa and Joe returning from town, he thought, but when he emerged from the cellar, the sight that greeted him stole his breath away. Maddie stood beside her car, which was packed with luggage. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore a simple sundress instead of her usual tailored clothes. She looked softer somehow, more at home in her own skin. "You're back," Luke said, hardly daring to hope what it might mean. "I never really left," Maddie replied, walking toward him. "My heart stayed here even when I didn't recognize it." "The job in France. I turned it down." Her smile was radiant. "Sure. I flew to New York to resign from my consulting positions and pack up my apartment. I've decided my future is here." Luke closed the distance between them, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "With the vineyard?" "With the vineyard," she confirmed. "And with you if you'll have me as a partner, in every sense of the word." His answer was a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Luke gestured to her car. "That's a lot of luggage for someone who just wants to be a simple vineyard owner." "Not all of it is clothes," Maddie explained. "I brought back some of my professional equipment, proper tasting glasses, marketing materials, my industry contacts list. If we're going to make Carrington Vines the best it can be, we need to combine your expertise with mine." The pride in Luke's eyes told her she'd said exactly the right thing. "I like the sound of that. Your grandfather would have too." That evening, they gathered on the porch with Rosa and Joe, sharing plans for the vineyard's future over bottles of wine that represented both its past and its promise. As twilight deepened, Luke disappeared briefly into the house, returning with a small wooden box. "There's something I've been wanting to give you," he told Maddie, opening the box to reveal an old-fashioned key. "Your grandfather gave me this, the day he made me part owner. It's the key to the original wine cellar where the first Carrington wines were made. He said I should hold on to it until the right moment." Maddie took the key, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. "What's in there?" "I don't know," Luke admitted. "He never showed me. He said it would be something for us to discover together when the time was right." Hand in hand, they walked to the oldest part of the property, where a stone building stood half-hidden by ancient oak trees. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the heavy wooden door swung open to reveal a small room lined with wine racks filled with dusty bottles. In the center stood a simple wooden table with an envelope propped against a single bottle of wine. The label read, "Eleanor's Promise, 1975, the year Maddie's grandparents had purchased the land." Maddie opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of her grandparents standing proudly before newly planted vines, along with a short note in her grandfather's handwriting. "To whoever finds this, If you're reading these words, it means you've chosen to carry on what Eleanor and I started. Wine is like love. It takes time, patience, and faith in the future. Plant your roots deep, nurture what matters, and remember that the sweetest vintages come from vines that have weathered the harshest seasons. With love, Frank. As Luke poured 2 glasses of the precious old wine, Maddie felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The 3 months that had begun as an obligation had transformed into the beginning of something beautiful and lasting. 2. New beginnings, Luke said, raising his glass to hers. And to second chances, Maddie added, her free hand finding his. Outside, the vineyard stretched away under the stars, the neat rows of vines standing sentinel over the land that had brought them together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was still so much work to be done to secure the vineyard's future. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. As they sipped the wine that carried her grandparents' legacy, Maddie knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Her life in New York had brought her success, but here, with the vineyard and with Luke, she had found something far more valuable, a place to belong, a purpose that resonated with her soul, and a love that promised to grow deeper with each passing season. 2 months later, Carrington Vines hosted its first harvest festival in over a decade. The grounds were transformed with twinkling lights and long tables set for a community dinner. Local restaurants served dishes paired with Carrington wines, including the special blend now officially named Madeline's Return. The vineyard's reputation was growing, with orders coming in from as far away as Chicago and Miami. As the sun set and music began to play, Luke led Maddie to the center of the makeshift dance floor. Around them, neighbors, friends, and even some of Maddie's former clients from New York swayed to the gentle melody. "You once said wine tells a story," Luke said, holding her close. "Well, I want to spend the rest of my life writing ours." She leaned in, forehead to his. "What if I told you I've already started the next chapter?" He raised an eyebrow in question. "I found some old growth plans in my grandfather's study," Maddie explained. "He had ideas for expanding to the North Field, maybe even starting a small wine education center. With the profits from our new restaurant contracts, we could make it happen by next spring." Luke's eyes shone with love and admiration. "I was going to propose something far less ambitious, but I should know by now that you never think small." Maddie laughed, then grew serious as his words sank in. "Wait, propose?" With a smile that held all the promise of their future together, Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Around them, the festival continued, but in that moment, they were alone in their own world, a world they had built together from crushed grapes and second chances. "Madeline Carrington," Luke said, his voice steady and sure. "I know it hasn't been very long, but when you know, you know. Will you marry me and make Carrington Vines our legacy together?" As Maddie looked into his eyes, she saw not just the man before her, but the life they could build. Seasons of hard work and rich rewards, challenges weathered side by side, and love that, like the finest wine, would only improve with time. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full to overflowing. "Yes, to everything." The cheers of the crowd as Luke slipped the ring on her finger. A simple band with a small diamond flanked by tiny rubies the color of their best red wine told them that this wasn't just their happiness, but a joy shared by all who had watched their story unfold. Later that night, as they stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home, Maddie spotted a shooting star streaking across the sky above the vineyard. "Make a wish," Luke said, his arm around her waist. Maddie smiled and shook her head. "I don't need to. Everything I could wish for is right here." And as they looked out over the land that had brought them together, the vines that had taught them patience and the future they would craft side by side, Maddie knew that sometimes the most perfect endings come disguised as unexpected beginnings. For her, true happiness hadn't been found in the glamorous career she'd pursued for so long, but in returning to her roots and opening her heart to new possibilities, in learning that love, like the finest wine, required the perfect blend of passion, patience, and faith in what tomorrow might bring. The end.